Attraction feels mysterious, romantic, chaotic. But what if most of that chaos is just your brain misreading the environment? Because the mind you are using to date was built for a world that does not exist anymore. A world of small tribes, long memories, and real social consequences. Today, you can speak to a stranger, get rejected, and it changes almost nothing. But your body reacts as if you are about to be punished. That is the central glitch. And once you understand it, dating stops feeling like a personal verdict. It starts feeling like probability. A system shaped by biology, evolution, incentives, and constraints. In this video, I want to give you a simple model that is grounded in real research and practical enough to use immediately. No gimmicks, no scripts, just an accurate map of what is going on. Because when your map is wrong, every decision feels confusing. When your map is right, the same world suddenly makes sense. For most of human history, mating was not entertainment. It was a survival problem. We lived in small groups where everyone knew everyone. Reputations stuck, gossip traveled, social mistakes could cost you alliances, status, protection, even access to resources. So your nervous system evolved to treat social risk seriously. That is why rejection still feels heavy. Your body does not care that you are in a modern city. It is still running ancient settings. That mismatch between ancient psychology and modern life explains a huge chunk of modern dating stress. And it is one of the central ideas in evolutionary psychology grounded in biology, rather than comforting stories. Now, let's start with a principle that quietly runs the entire dating market: parental investment theory. In 1972, Robert Trivers explained that the sex that pays the higher minimum cost per child tends to be choosier, and the sex that pays less tends to compete more. In humans, women pay a higher biological minimum. Pregnancy, childbirth, and the physical vulnerability around reproduction are real costs. So across history, selection favored more selectivity in female choice and more competition in male strategy. That does not mean all men and women are identical within their sex. It means the averages tilt in predictable directions. And research keeps bumping into that pattern. For example, a well-known field study by Clark and Hatfield found that men were far more likely than women to accept a direct, casual sex invitation from a stranger. Other work has explored how risk perception and context shape receptivity, but the core result still reflects the same underlying logic. The outcome is simple. Men, on average, can afford to say yes more often. Women, on average, face higher downside risk in saying yes too easily, so selectivity makes sense. Now zoom out. This is why rejection is normal for men. Not because you are defective, because the system produces more male bids than female acceptance. That is what competition looks like. And cross-cultural evidence supports it. David Buss tested sex differences in mate preferences across 37 cultures, and while details vary by society, broad trends repeat, with women placing relatively more emphasis on resources and status cues, and men placing relatively more emphasis on youth and physical attractiveness cues. Again, the outcome is not cynicism. The outcome is clarity. You stop taking every no as a personal collapse of worth. You start seeing it as a predictable output of an asymmetric market. So far, this might sound like bad news, but here is where the modern world flips the script. Your brain is calibrated for a world where rejection had real cost. Modern environments massively reduce that cost. You are not trapped in a village. You are not stuck with one social group for life. You are not permanently branded by one awkward moment. In most everyday situations today, rejection is cheap. Embarrassing, yes. Dangerous, usually no. Yet your nervous system still reacts as if rejection is expensive. That is what people call approach anxiety. And the important point is this: approach anxiety is not a sign that you should not act. It is often a sign that you are feeling an outdated alarm. Now, when men feel this mismatch, they usually go looking for a hack. They assume dating is a psychological puzzle. They start hunting for scripts, opening lines, tricks, little techniques that supposedly bypass rejection. But there is a major issue. Female mate choice is a black box, not in a mystical way, in a scientific way. Even serious researchers acknowledge that mate choice involves layers of subconscious processing, hormonal influences, social context, and evolved preference mechanisms that are not fully transparent, even to the chooser. This is why folk psychology often fails here. We feel like we understand attraction because we experience it, but the mechanism is deeper than everyday intuition. And research gives us endless reminders that preferences are not simple. For example, there is research suggesting women's preferences can shift across the menstrual cycle, with studies such as Penton Voke and colleagues published in Nature being widely cited in this area. You do not need the details, you just need the implication. If preferences can be influenced by biology in subtle, hard-to-notice ways, then the idea that a scripted line reliably controls attraction is fantasy. So the outcome is this: stop searching for one magic behavior that works on women. Instead, think in probabilities, because the most useful model for dating is not romance, it is statistics. In any mating market, your results come from two levers. First, your probability per attempt. Second, your number of attempts. The first lever is what many researchers and evolutionary frameworks call mate value, the bundle of traits that tends to increase desirability. The second lever is exposure, the simple fact of showing up and creating opportunities. Most men obsess over the first lever because it feels safe. Work on yourself, gym, money, status, style, all of that helps. And it is worth doing. But it is also slow, incremental, long-term. Exposure is immediate. And in modern life, exposure carries far less cost than your emotions suggest. This is where the rational strategy changes. In a high-cost environment, it makes sense to be cautious and avoid social damage. In a low-cost environment with huge partner pools, the rational strategy becomes sampling, sequential mate choice, repeated attempts over time. Not because you are desperate, because that is how probability works. Now think about why this feels hard emotionally. It is because your brain is still pricing rejection like it is ancestral. But in your real environment, rejection rarely removes future options. It does not reduce your value to the next person who has never met you. It does not lock you out of the market. So each attempt has upside with minimal downside. The only truly expensive behavior in a low-cost environment is avoidance. Avoidance is what creates long-term scarcity. Avoidance is what turns a world with millions of potential partners into a tiny box. And here is another layer that makes this more than mindset. Your biology is responsive to social exposure. There is research showing that men's hormones, including testosterone, can shift in response to interactions with women. Some studies find rapid endocrine responses after social interactions. Other work links the presence of an attractive woman with increases in testosterone and shifts in risk-taking. Longer-term patterns show testosterone varying with relationship status, with lower levels often found in committed relationships and shifts after relationship dissolution. Again, you do not need to go deep. Just take the outcome. Your social environment can shape your biology. Your biology can shape your behavior. So exposure does not just create more opportunities, it can also recalibrate how you show up. That creates a feedback loop. More exposure tends to make exposure easier. Avoidance tends to make avoidance stronger. Now, layer in self-esteem. There is a line of research often described as sociometer theory, where self-esteem functions like a gauge of social inclusion and value. Some work applies this to mating contexts, meaning your self-esteem is partly tracking your perceived mate value and your perceived acceptance in the market. Outcome. If you keep avoiding, your internal gauge never gets new evidence, so it stays stuck on old signals. If you act even imperfectly, you update the model. You collect data. You show your nervous system that the world does not end. That is how fear declines. Not by convincing yourself with words, by proving it with experience. Now let's address something that many people misunderstand. Cold approach, speaking to strangers, is often assumed to be constant, aggressive, and everywhere. But one study the author references surveyed young Japanese women about unexpected advances from strangers and found many had experienced very few approaches across their lifetime. Whatever you think about cold approach culturally, the outcome is useful. Your fear often imagines you are stepping into a world where women are constantly harassed and you will be seen as a threat instantly. Reality is more nuanced. The difference is respect and calibration. Being socially aware, brief, polite, and giving an easy exit is worlds apart from harassment. Now, the modern environment also changes how people meet. Large-scale sociological research has documented the rise of the internet as a major social intermediary for meeting partners. And researchers who study networks have shown how the social world shapes who meets whom and how behavior spreads through networks. Outcome: you are not living in a fixed mating pool. You are living in a dynamic market with huge reach. But that also increases comparison, increases choice, increases the sense that you are competing with everyone. This can make people freeze. So the core move is not to retreat into theory. The move is to align behavior with the real cost structure. Raise mate value over time because it improves your life and your odds. Increase exposure now because it creates opportunities and recalibrates your system. And stop demanding certainty from a probabilistic system. Mate choice is complex. No model guarantees outcomes. But you do not need guarantees. You need enough attempts for probability to do its job, because the modern world has quietly removed the old penalties. Rejection is mostly noise now. Avoidance is the real cost. Here is the takeaway. Stop looking for a perfect script. Research on mate choice shows the mechanisms are too complex and too context-dependent for any one method to work reliably across people and situations. Instead, think like a strategist. Your outcomes come from two levers: your probability per attempt and your number of attempts. Improving mate value raises the first lever over time. Exposure raises the second lever immediately. Now the most important shift. Stop treating rejection like a verdict. In modern environments, rejection is usually cheap. Your nervous system is reacting to an ancestral world where rejection could carry real cost. That fear is not a prophecy. It is an outdated alarm. So build your confidence the only way confidence becomes real. Act, collect evidence, and recalibrate. Raise your mate value because it improves your life. Increase exposure because it creates opportunities. And remember the line that summarizes everything. Rejection is cheap. Avoidance is expensive.